Okay, most people are taller than I am, so.
I have to admit, I'm really off. Hi, Lena, how are you? I'm saying to myself, putting this on today, I'm saying, this will look nice next week with parables.
My glasses were not in there. Okay, that's okay. I probably could use Sherry's, but I can get away without them.
Aspirins?
Oh, I thought you.
Glasses. Oh, no, I can't help they are. I wear those.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sweaty. My nose is running. Yes, much better. We're not so far away. I knew this was a mistake right from the start. I should have just given this part to Dale. I kept saying to myself, I knew this part was a mistake. I should have given it to Dale right first. I said to myself after a week went by, I said, "Oh, this is Dale. But that didn't work. I kept at it. I hope. Thank you, Fran. I feel so much better sitting on two chairs with somebody. I got this all worked up. I'm all happy. Gotta take our stuff over here. Here comes Steve. What's the purpose of this? Bring it there. Morning, good morning.
The Potato Masher by Martha Whitmore Hickman. Everyone knew the potato masher couldn't last forever. Few of the church people remembered a time when it hadn't stood there in the kitchen for most of the year, a hovering, shrouded presence at the far end of the stainless steel counter, its scarred metal base splaying out beneath the muslin cover like shoes sticking out from under a choir robe or ministerial gown. But once a year, for the annual turkey dinner and bazaar that the women of the church put on, the potato masher was unveiled, and its splendid steel looped paddle churned its way around the heavy steel bowl, turning 50 pounds of boiled potatoes at a time, along with measured amounts of cooking water, hot milk, melted butter, and salt, into a creamy, malleable mass of potato to be dished out along with turkey, stuffing, green beans, and a little fluted paper cup of cranberry onto the plates of the eager diners who had come to the chief fundraising event for which the women were justifiably famous.
Mattie Edwards always ran the potato masher. The machine was really an all-purpose mixer, but since it was used exclusively for potato mashing, that's how they always referred to it. No one knew how it came to be Mattie's domain, even those who were closest in her age. She was 72 and didn't remember a time when Mattie didn't have this particular job. During the years when she had been in charge with the whole dinner and bazaar, she had managed to run the masher. "All right, start carving," she would say to the several husbands who loyally turned up each year, carving sets in hand to dismember the birds they had cooked at home and brought steaming and roasting pans to the church in the late afternoon. "Put the white meat and dark in separate plates," she reminded them, so that some of each on every plate. She would stop by the huge black stove, check on the gravy stirrers, the warmer of the canned beans, until later when they switched over to frozen, and the cutter-ups of giblets working their cutting boards. She said, "I'll do the potatoes." The pies were already cut into wedges of mince and pumpkin, lined on the plates of the tables in the nearest Sunday school room. Mattie had never been president of the Women's Society or sung in the choir or been on the governing board of the church. She taught Sunday school when her children were young, and the whole family went. Harold to the men's class, the children to their particular age groups, Mattie to the women's class until they recruited her for teaching. For the years she had taught the kindergarten class, and then a few more years she taught the junior high girls. Occasionally she would review a chapter in the mission study book, and she took a turn into the refreshments for circle meetings, the general meetings. But everyone agreed Mattie had always done a bang-up job at the turkey dinner and bazaar. "That's something I can do for the church," she would say modestly, and each December meeting, the treasurer announced a handsome sum garnered at the annual turkey dinner and bazaar, and Mattie to stand and thank her for her excellent work. "It's all of us working together," she said in response to their applause, and she would sit down content.
Then she gave up chairing the bazaar part of it, though she was still in charge of the dinner. Elsa took over the bazaar. Elsa was better at handwork, and she got some of the young people involved. She even got Mattie's 15-year-old daughter, Susan, who was balking at going to Sunday school and appeared to be growing generally indifferent to the church, to operate the fishbowl. To aid the cause and encourage Susan, Mattie contributed some of her best costume jewelry. and was secretly delighted when Jeffy, 10, spent 50 cents of his allowance on the fishbowl and hooked up her fake emerald earrings, which he gave to her for Christmas, not realizing they were hers. Her children grown, she gave up teaching Sunday school. She and Harold liked to have a leisurely reading of the Sunday paper before church, so they often skipped Sunday school altogether. But she kept being in charge of the annual turkey dinner. She could manage that. When Harold died, she was glad to have that project to occupy herself. Though when the men lined up to do the carving, she felt a sudden renewed jab of pain. No Harold. Then her arthritis worsened and she gave up managing the dinner. It was just too much, and it was getting harder and harder to get people to help. So many of the young women worked. It was all they could do to attend their once-a-month evening circle meeting and the general meeting of the women. But I'll still do the potatoes, Maddie said.
It was September, and the first business of the meeting was planning the turkey dinner and bazaar. Ruth began to distribute sign-up sheets. Who would cook the turkeys? Who would do the cleanup? Who would make the pies? One of the young women, her short dark hair in an elegant swirl around her head, raised her hand from the back row. I know the turkey dinner has been a tradition, she said, but frankly, maybe its time has passed. I'd much rather increase my contribution. She broke off and lowered her hand, her polished fingernails and gleaming gold bracelet catching the light. For a moment, there was silence. The young women on either side of the speaker nodded, as though in agreement. One of them leaned over and whispered something in her ear. Then Ruth said, her voice a trifle apologetic, "Thank you, Stacy, but some of us enjoy the fellowship." A buzz broke out in the back row. Lark, an intern at a local accounting firm, said, "Some of us have plenty of fellowship at work." What I long for, she paused as though to accentuate the depth of her longing, is more time with my family. Again, the back row of heads nodded. Maddie, seated in the second row, felt as tense as that time when she started jury duty. Ruth smiled deferentially at the row of young women. "We talked about this at the executive board meeting," she said. "We know you folks can't help much with the dinner and bazaar, but it's meant a lot to the church over the years, and some of us want to keep it going for a while longer. Just do what you can, and we'll appreciate your contributions."
There was a general wave of relieved laughter when the sign-up sheet got to Maddie. She wrote, 2 pies, pumpkin. Help with dinner, potatoes. And passed the sheet along the row, the tension over the whole issue moving away from her as the piece of paper traveled away to her left. There were so many things changing. Sometimes it made her almost dizzy, or at least made her wonder what her place was in the world anymore. Her Her children were all grown and moved to different parts of the country. They came home from time to time. Each summer, she had the grandchildren for a week or so, and it seemed like old times. They looked through the photo albums. She took them on picnics in the park and to the zoo. She made that special mapled custard that her children had always loved. But then they would all be gone, and she'd be all lonesome all over again. Now the church, that bulwark of stability when she and Harold were raising the children, the place that had given her a spirit when Harold had died, where she'd made her closest friends among the women, that too was changing. They even had a young woman minister. A nice enough person, but she'd probably never mashed a potato in her life. Maddie could not look at her without feeling some silent self-reproach. A young woman so smart, with degrees, traveling all over the country and calling God Mother. And now those young women agitating to drop the turkey dinner and bazaar. Well, thank goodness they hadn't succeeded this time.
Two weeks before the dinner, the committee met in the church kitchen to wash the dishes and silverware and cooking equipment in preparation for the big day. Maddie had not meant to make a big deal of it, but she did have special feelings for that potato masher. All the years she had operated it through one turkey dinner after another. It wasn't easy to make it go. Old and temperamental it was. But she could. She could make it go. She had always prided herself on having a way with electrical equipment. I might have been an engineer, she said to Harold at home one day when noticing a suspicious falter in the vacuum motor. He had tried to fix it and been unable to. I'd better take it to the shop, he said. Wait a minute. She turned it over and found a partial tear in the belt. Here's what's making the noise. She showed him. She had an extra belt and she put it on, stretching it with the bowl of a spoon to get it over the spindle. There. I could have been an engineer, she said. He nodded, impressed with her skill. I'm sure you could have, he said. That was one thing about Harold. He was very free with his praise. But now he was gone, and there was no one to tell her she'd done a good job about anything, except for the grandchildren who loved her cooking and the versions of chopsticks she taught them to play on the piano, thumping the triads up and down on all the black keys. That's good, Grandma, they would say, and immediately try it out themselves. Maybe she did care that she, and she alone, ran the potato masher.
Anyway, when Barbara had a big sink full of warm suds and said, "Here, pass me the potato masher bowl and paddle. I'll wash them too," Maddie had rushed over to Tootie, could turn the release button or discharge the paddle and said, "Here, I'll do it." Tootie stepped back to make way for her, and she dislodged the paddle and bowl and brought them to Barbara, who stood at the sink, her dripping hands suspended over soapy water. It was then she heard Ruth mutter to Tootie, "Maddie thinks nobody can work the potato masher." Tootie, bless her heart, answered, "Well, maybe they can't. It looks pretty tricky to me." Oh, it's not complicated, Maddie said, trying to pass it off, but it was. And getting more and more temperamental each year. You had to know how to put the paddle in and the little knob fitting into the grooves of the right of the housing. Then you had to start the machine really slow, like a car on an icy road. And sometimes you had to press your hand on the side of the motor and lean against it, or it wouldn't go. Years ago, they had to talk of having it overhauled. It had costs long since outrun its warranty. In fact, the company that made it had gone out of business, and no one had seen the instruction booklet for years. They had checked on the replacement costs. A new potato masher would cost $3,000. There was other things the mission budget needed. A lot more than a new potato masher.
We could always have baked potatoes, Ruth said from the cupboard where she was counting out cups. Baked, the thought was offensive to Maddie. Baked potato just didn't go with turkey dinner. For one thing, how many children had she seen delightedly making a well in the mounds of mashed potato and easing the gravy in, then making a notch in the wall and watching the gravy flow down the side? Why, it was a way of learning about volcanoes. Not to mention having fun at church so they might still want to go when they grew up. And they were supposed to go to baked, where everyone had to struggle with his own potato skin? And then some would eat the skins and some wouldn't, and gravy would be wasted, and there'd be much more mess to clean up. I suppose we could go to baked, she said. Ruth closed the cupboard door and moved to one of the silverware drawers. I don't suppose in the internal scheme of things it matters whether we have baked or mashed. Do you think? She turned to Maddie, who by now was wiping the masher paddle with a towel.
Maddie wasn't used to thinking those things in those terms. I suppose not, she said. But then she thought, if God cares for the fall of a sparrow, maybe he cares for potatoes. Somehow, holding onto the potato masher bowl made her bold, and she said, well, if God cares for the fall of the sparrow. Ruth didn't answer, so she said, if God numbers the hair on everybody's head. Frances stood by, checking the dish towels. For goodness sakes, Frances said, patting her hairpiece everybody knew she wore. Let's have mashed. If the masher works, Barbara said, if Maddie can make it work. Was there, Maddie wondered, a note of ridicule in Barbara's voice? It'll work, she said, but she wasn't at all sure. She stroked the massive bowl as though it were a family pet. At home that night, Maddie decided one more time. She'd do the potatoes one more time. Then, assuming the potato masher lasted, someone else could do it. She'd show them how. Perhaps she'd go back to working on the fish bowl. She thought of Jeffy, fishing up those earrings, 10 years old. And now he was 45 and starting to get gray hair.
The trouble began early the morning of the turkey dinner and bazaar. Maddie hadn't even gotten her breakfast dishes done when the phone rang. It was Ruth. Maddie, we've just been setting things up for the day, and the masher won't run. What, won't run? Collecting her thoughts. This was to have been her swan song, her last time. Surely the machine wouldn't fail her now. Are you sure it's plugged in? There was an audible sigh. Of course it's plugged in. A pause. Then, Maddie, we haven't started peeling yet. How about we have baked? Oh, let's not have baked. It was unthinkable. Sometimes it's tricky. Give the plug a little push and see if it doesn't connect. All right, hold on. She waited. She heard it start. The hum of the potato masher. She knew that sound. But there was a catch in it. She doubted if Ruth would detect it. It's going, Ruth exclaimed. Oh, thanks, Maddie. When will you be down? Oh, about 4:30. That'll be time enough. If she went too early, she'd be tired by the time it came to make the potatoes.
She got there a little after 4. They'd start serving at 5:30. The bazaar was already in full swing. In the ladies' parlor, people were milling around among the handcraft items. Aprons, embroidered pillowcases with his and hers in raised letters, surrounded by birds done in outline stitches of pink and blue. Some stuffed dolls from patterns at the fabric store. Fluffy tulle covers for the extra rolls of toilet paper. The other table were the homemade pickles and jellies, the cookies and loaf breads, then paper napkins with Bible verses in blue letters, bags of nuts ordered from that farm in Georgia, and finally the fishbowl with Elsa's granddaughter seated behind it, holding the pole with its dangling string and fishhook. Wonderful smells of turkey and dressing permeated the room.
Elsa rushed over to her. Oh, Maddie, they're looking for you. She hurried into the kitchen. Here she is, someone said as she came through the swinging doors. The carvers are carving. People stood at the stove stirring. 2 people were chopping giblets. But the biggest crowd had gathered at the end of the counter. So she could tell from their faces something was wrong. Oh, it must be the potato masher. Tootie turned to her. It won't go. We tried to start it, but some early takeouts. Tootie looked over to Ruth, who stood tight-lipped at the other end of the machine. We should have had baked. We'll never get this thing going. You should have waited for me, Maddie thought, but she had good judgment not to say so. And are the potatoes cooked, she asked. Of course they're cooked. We wouldn't be trying to mash some to takeouts, Frances said. The steam table are turned on, ready, but the big thing, and she flung her hands wide with impatience at the impatience of the potato masher. What are we going to do? We should have more than one person who can work this machine. Maddie made her announcement. This is my last time. I'll write down all the areas to know, or you could just watch me, but someone else can do it. I'm tired.
For a moment, their look was one of alarm, then commiseration, and perhaps a glimmer of understanding why it was so important to her to have this one thing she did better than anyone else. Almost this time, more than they wanted the potatoes to be ready, they wanted Maddie to triumph over the balky eccentricities of the potato masher. She walked over to the stove, to the huge kettle mounted with clouds of steam, the first batch of potatoes. She took a long-handled fork and stuck it in. "You're right, they're ready," she said. "Milk heating?" she asked. Right there, they showed her. The butter. She picked up 2 sticks of butter and stirred them into the hot milk. She returned to the potato masher, tipped back the motor casing, and inserted the paddle, the little knob fitting into the groove on the housing. She turned the on knob to the right and pressed the electric plug deeper into the wall receptacle. The juice connected. The motor began to hum. The women waited. They'd been through this much of it before. "The problem is the paddle won't turn," Tootie said. Maddie nodded. There was that funny sticking sound she'd heard over the phone. She remembered it from last year. "Bring the potatoes," she said. Ruth and Minna grabbed pot holders, lifted the kettle from the stove, and approached the potato masher. "Pour them in," Maddie said. They tipped the kettle. The steam water and jamming potatoes approached the lip, then rumbled into the kettle, splashing drops of scalding water against their aprons. Then the whole rushing stream tumbled in.
"The paddle won't turn," Tootie said. "We tried it this afternoon." "We'll see," she said. "My last time, God," she prayed. "You want those potatoes mashed? Turn that motor." In the kitchen, all activity stopped. Carvers, who had had the good judgment to stay away from the potato masher crisis, stood nevertheless with their knives in the air. Stirrers held their spoons dangling like plumb lines into the simmering beans and the boiling gravy. Giblet choppers rested their knives on their cutting boards. Maddie straightened her body beside the huge steel bowl, pressed the paddle a little tighter into the receiving disc. Then slowly, she lowered the housing, holding it back, so the paddle came down smoothly without a catch or a jerk into the steaming kettle. Again, she prayed, "You want mashed? This is our chance. Please."
In from the parlor drifted the sounds of the bazaar. From the dining room where the youth fellowship was setting the tables came the clank of silverware, salts and peppers going down. Maddie put one foot on the base of the pedestal of the frame holding the potato masher. She pressed one hand hard against the housing of the motor, leaning the weight of her body into it to push it ever so slightly out of alignment. With the other hand, she reached around and very slowly, a tiny increment at a time, careful not to jerk it, she turned the knob. At first, there was a low buzz, as though the motor were running, but the gears wouldn't turn. Then the sound changed. The paddle groaned and began to turn. moving the potatoes and milk like a slow-moving puddle. Then, with a whir, the paddle started to churn. The bowl throbbed. Steam and whirring liquid rose and fell in mounds and vortexes, climbing against the lip of the huge bowl and fell back. Maddie braced against the mixer, felt energy flow through her 72-year-old body and into that machine, the careening potatoes becoming a smooth blend of creamy substance, the perfect foil for gravy and turkey and green beans and cranberry sauce. A cheer went up. The watchers broke into applause, their faces a mixture of astonishment and relief. Then the carvers returned to their carving, the stirrers to their stirring, and the choppers to their chopping. "You're a miracle worker, Maddie," Ruth said and shook her head. "Not me," Maddie said.